Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 13 of the World Soccer Talk podcast, we discuss the latest research about soccer on TV in 2016, including some surprising stats, as well as big streaming news for Premier League soccer fans in the US. And of course, we've got lots of soccer matches to discuss in what we've been watching and much, much more. Kartik, how are you?
I'm doing well, Chris. How about you?
Really good. Really, really good. It's been a good week of soccer from around the world in terms of some of the stuff that we've been watching. So let's start off there. My name's Christopher Harris, by the way, a.k.a. The Gaffer. Kartik, let me kick this off. So out of all the matches I saw this past week, and I saw a lot, the one that stood out for me the most, and the one that I enjoyed the most, was probably a surprise to myself and some of the listeners, but that was Porto against Sporting from the Primeira Liga in Portugal. And I watched this one this past, I think, Saturday. It was on Univision Deportes, and I watched it through my Fubo account. It had co-commentary by Hugo Salcedo, and then commentary itself by Enrique Bermudez, who I think his nickname is the Bulldog. He's the one with like the really deep voice. You can't miss it on Liga MX and Mexican national team broadcasts. But overall, Kartik, it was a great game. I really enjoyed it. It was I was a little bit disappointed by the lack of passion in the stadium. Yes, it was sold out, but I was expecting more in terms of just noise and just animosity in some ways, but just passion. It wasn't there as much as I thought, but the game itself was great, back and forth, kind of end-to-end game, and Porto 1-2-1.
That's the Hugo Salcedo, right? Former US.
Yeah. So that was, it was in
He's
Spanish.
Still around and kicking. Okay.
Yeah,
great
it was in Spanish, so my Spanish is very, very poor. I can understand a tiny bit. So I couldn't understand much of what he was saying, but the game itself was really exciting. I really enjoyed it. It's probably the first or second Portuguese match, club game I've watched this season, and that was my highlight from this past weekend. A great game, and Porto 1-2-1. What about you, Kartik? What was your highlight of this past week?
Probably watching the argument between Kyle Martino and Robbie Mustoe following the conclusion of the Leicester-Manchester United game. I think it was unscripted, it was spontaneous. So I complained that so much on NBC is scripted, right? It seems to be predictable. This was not predictable. Martino, who obviously we talked about time and again, has great insights on this program. He talks about how it's clear to him that Ranieri has lost the dressing room and that Leicester is spiraling out of control. You need to make a managerial change to keep the team up. And Robbie Mustoe, somewhat unpredictably, lashed out, made great television, said, no, this guy won the league last year. You can't sack him. The team punched above its weight. He has a track record of getting more than their natural abilities out of this particular set of players. Not another set of players, not at another club, but this set of players, you need to stick with them. It was real interesting. And then that conversation kind of continued on ESPN FC during the week. ESPN FC has been really good last week and this week. And one of the big topics of discussion has been the Ranieri situation with Craig Burley believing that we shouldn't even be having the discussion because we're having the discussion because the team punched so far above its weight last season. If you look at where they are now in the table compared to where they were at this point 2 seasons ago, they're in better shape. They have more points, and they didn't sack Nigel Pearson. Now, that having been said, I want to remind folks that this was the week 2 years ago when we thought Nigel Pearson had been sacked. And we went around for about 3 hours on the Sunday, and it was the Sunday coming up, thinking Pearson had been sacked. And then the club made a clear statement that he had not been sacked. But it is a club, as Burley points out, that had high expectations in the championship, spent a lot of money, was thought to be a club that would violate financial fair play rules, was thought to be a club that would pop right up when the takeover took place, and they underachieved. And Nigel Pearson somehow, and I'm still shocked by this, and I point this out when people say he was wrong when he was finally sacked. For some reason, he kept his job when they finished 7th in the league one year, didn't make the playoffs, when they lost that playoff match, the famous match where Almunia made the save on the penalty, and then Watford scored the dramatic goal. He kept his job after that, and then was able to get them promoted eventually, but basically had, on paper, one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the championship every year he was there, and it took him a while to get promoted.
Okay, Kartik. So what do you think? So in terms of that basically debate between Carl Martino and Robbie Mustoe, do you think both of them were authentically believing in their side of the argument, or do you think there was kind of a, all right, you take this side, I'll take that side type of argument?
No, it seemed too spontaneous for that. I am sure there was some discussion while they're off camera and off air during the end of that match as to which position they're going to take and what they're believing. Mm-hmm. But it was, I've seen these disagreements between Robbie and even between Martino and one of the 2 Robbies seem to me very scripted. And I pointed that out on this podcast in the past. This time I thought it was pretty genuine. But it was the moment, right? It was one of the takeaway moments of NBC's Premier League coverage this season, or maybe the entire 4 years they've had the Premier League. I mean, wow. People were buzzing about it for a while, and it was so good they used it again on Match of the Day that night.
I missed it. This past weekend for me, again, another soccer weekend, my daughter playing different games, so I wasn't able to catch everything, but I'm sad I missed it, actually, because to me, if it is authentic and these people, I mean, these experts believe in what they're saying, then even if I disagree with them, I still enjoy it. And Fox, I mean, I know that Alexi Lalas and Richard Deutsch from Sports Illustrated have gotten into a lot of kind of disagreements on Twitter and on podcasts where Richard has interviewed Alexi Lalas. And Lalas has come out and said, yeah, of course, most of our disagreements on air are scripted beforehand. We kind of say, okay, you take this side, I'll take this side. And then we kind of in rehearsals, we'll practice that. And Richard, as am I, I'm against that because I think it's fake. Yes, you don't want to have people agreeing all the time, but a lot of the viewers, I think, can see through that, and it doesn't feel sincere. And Alexi says, well, it's entertainment. That's what we do. We're an entertainer. We're not so much, yes, we're analysts, but we're trying to keep people a captive audience. We're trying to kind of hold them on. But in many ways, that kind of works against them, I think, in many ways. And that's the reason I asked whether or not it felt authentic in that debate.
Do you think, at Fox, that seems to be the case? I mean, I've thought that a lot of the discussions there were put-ons, as I did at NBC. But this time, I think it was one of those things where Mustoe, perhaps they had discussed in the past during the break and during the tail end of that match when they're off air, and it's Arlo, Lee, and Graham doing the game, that they were on different sides of this issue. But it was Mustoe's passion, his willingness to really kind of engage and defend Ranieri that made it a spirited discussion, and Martino is not going to back off because he look. I mean, whether it's luck or it's just being very good at this, I think it's probably being very good at this. Martino's predictions generally come to pass, right? I mean, right. He's been pretty much on the money about most things, and when you're on air as much as he is, and you say as many things as he is, it's pretty difficult statistically to have the track record he does. But even at the beginning of last season, you remember after the Swansea game when we hadn't realized this Eva Canero thing had happened, but it was a Swansea-Chelsea draw, first 2-2. Game of the season. Right. Martino's talking about third-year syndrome with Jose Mourinho's clubs. And I remember thinking right away, this is kind of reactionary. He's reacting to one result. Why is he saying this? Right. They've drawn, they were unfortunate, whatever. And as it turns out, I mean, he had pegged it. So that's just one example, but he has a very good track record on pegging this. And so what he says he takes very seriously, and we take very seriously. Mustoe chose to engage. with a somewhat unpredictable position, because I think our complaints about Musto recently have been that he is a good analyst, but his views are very predictable, right?
Right.
And this was not so predictable, because Musto seems to be a guy who is consistently saying it's time to sack a manager, right? Mm-hmm. He's the one who said, well, Alan Pardew's got to go. It's clear that this isn't working, and so on and so forth. Bob Bradley needs to go. Maybe you give him the game against Bournemouth, which they didn't even give him, right? But that was it. He got sacked the next day. But he has been quick to give up on managers. So his impassioned defense of Ranieri was surprising. But then, again, you have to listen to his arguments. The guy won the league last year, right? And he's finished second with a bunch of other teams around different leagues in Europe. This isn't some relegation specialist that's been brought in. It's a different type of manager.
And that makes great television, though, too. So whether it is scripted or not, we're hoping that it's not, and it probably isn't. But I'm sure, like you said, they may have had some kind of discussions, pre-production or just kind of off the cuff type of thing. But it makes great entertainment, and it is something that kind of keeps you. That gives you a reason to keep on watching the shows and kind of to hear what they're going to say. Something else that NBC did this weekend, which was quite different too, is the whole excellent adventure. And we talked about this in the last show, where Lee Dixon, Graham Lasso, and Arlo White were going to do some kind of behind-the-scenes coverage as far as taking them from the one stadium, I think it was Stamford Bridge, to White Hart Lane, and then stopping at some London landmarks along the way, going on motorbikes. And I was actually a little bit disappointed in that I thought it was going to be more on television, and I didn't realize it was going to be more on social media.
Yeah, I was actually very disappointed by it, because it was neat, but they only spent the last few minutes of Goal Zone discussing it, and and one segment at halftime. And I thought there was going to be updates during their other broadcasts. I thought there was going to be more coverage of it. It was an attempt to drive people to social media, which
right.
I might do normally, but I wasn't going to do in the middle of all these games, to be honest with you. And you're trying to balance the watching of 8 Premier League games or whatever at 3 p.m. kickoffs in England, and 5 Bundesliga games, trying to juggle all the scores, championship games going on. It's difficult to then go to Instagram or wherever this was.
Right, Facebook mostly, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't on Twitter. Because
right.
I am on Twitter during the games to get the updates from other places, and it was, I think it was Instagram.
Well, mostly Facebook. So I watched it. So it was distracting, because I was trying to listen to Rebecca. You mean kind of that 9:30 to 10 o'clock kind of pre-match analysis and discussion. But I kind of muted her, which I felt bad about. And I went over to Facebook, and actually, this for me at least was really enjoyable. So you saw, as soon as the match ended, you saw kind of Arlo White and Lee Dixon and Graham Lasso taking off their headsets, and then just walking around Stamford Bridge to kind of show them going down the steps in the stadium, walking through the crowds, getting autographs signed for Lee Dixon and Graham Lasso, and then jumping on the motorbikes, and off they went. So for me, kind of as somebody who loves stadium designs and loves behind-the-scenes information and trying to see exactly kind of how these people work in what type of environment, I loved it. The bad thing is that you can see on Facebook, in terms of Facebook Live, I think the most number of people I saw watching was maybe about 450 to 500 people. So there weren't a lot of people there. And of course, people would come back later, I'm sure, and watch it. Not live, but on demand type of thing. But so I think from NBC's perspective, they're probably disappointed by the numbers. But I enjoyed it. It was a nice little distraction. But then as soon as 10 o'clock happened, then I switched right back to, I think, Hull against Liverpool and NBCSN, and then I kind of forgot about the excellent adventure. The Hull against Liverpool game, Kartik, wasn't the most entertaining one. Well, I was hoping that Hull would lose this one, so I was a little bit disappointed. I did watch the first half, but then had to leave for the second half to go take my daughter to a soccer game. But the one thing I did, Kartik, I don't know if you've done this in a while, but it's been years since I've done it. So the second half, I was at a park in Wellington, Florida. So beautiful sunny day down here, beautiful weather, and had basically an hour before my daughter's game was getting ready to kick off They were just warming up. But I was walking around this park, beautiful sunshine, listening to BBC Radio 5 Live and via the World Service. And I was just listening to the second half commentary of Hull against Liverpool. And it just brought me back to fond memories of listening to radio broadcasts, really good radio broadcasts, not TalkSport broadcasts of matches. And lots of great, wonderful memories of listening to Sports World on BBC World Service in the days of shortwave radio before there was the internet. And for me, it was kind of a nostalgic experience. I enjoyed it because at the same time too, as the Hull against Liverpool match was going on and they were commentating on that, they were going around the grounds and saying, okay, all right, here's a goal at Bradford, or now we're going to switch over to Six Nations rugby between Scotland and Ireland, and here's the latest try that was just scored. But anyway, so it was kind of, for me at least, a walk down memory lane, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't know, maybe I'll do a little bit more of that this year, because sometimes it's hard, especially if it's you're walking through sunlight, you're out. It's hard to actually be able to watch a game on a phone, just because of the glare and even in the signal. But radio oftentimes I think trumps that, and is a great experience. How about you, Kartik? Have you listened to any games lately on radio?
No, I haven't. I haven't in many years, actually.
See, I'm dating myself.
I guess that's not correct. No, that is not correct, actually. I say I haven't in many years. I don't think I have this season. I did listen to a lot of TalkSport coverage of the Premier League. When I'm in Tallahassee, so it probably might happen again in March or April of this year when I'm up there. When I'm up in Tallahassee for the Florida legislative session, I listen a lot to TalkSport in the car and around town, and that's and that gives me the freedom to kind of move about during these Premier League games. So that's it's incorrect to say I have not listened to a radio call. I just have not in this 16-17 season thus far. So, but I tend to listen. Actually, I tend to listen to TalkSport a lot in after matches as well. And,
right.
I've kind of transitioned toward TalkSport away from 606. Maybe I'll give 606 a listen again sometime soon. But it's been a while since I have listened to 606.
Me too. It's been a while since I listened to 606. But I've enjoyed the commentaries, and I think it was Alan Green. Actually, maybe it was Alan Green. I can't remember. But Alan Green still does a lot of the radio broadcasts that you can listen to. And actually, if it is a tip for listeners too. So if it is blocked, trying to go through 5 Live, you can always listen to it through BBC World Service, and they don't block it through there. So you can always listen to not every match, but usually one match on Saturdays and one match on Sundays. So Kartik, that Chelsea-Arsenal match. So what were your thoughts on that one in terms of what you saw on the pitch?
Oh, it was just a terrible performance from Arsenal, who I think, by the way, are far more talented relative to the rest of the Premier League than they've been in the past. So the years that there's been a lot of criticism of Wenger for finishing third or fourth and not really competing for titles. Last year they finished second, but they really didn't compete for the title, right? Spurs, who finished third, did compete for the title. So in my mind, Arsenal was the third or fourth place team again last year. They have been weaker relative to the rest of the Premier League. They have not had the strongest squad on paper. Maybe they've had the third or fourth best squad. Some years, maybe they've had the fifth or sixth best squad, and he's gotten them into the top 4. I think this season, I look at that squad, and I think that they've got the best squad in the division, top to bottom. Now, Wenger is having a problem motivating the players to play in. Look, it's all good and well that you lose to Chelsea, but they lost to Watford right before that, and they should have dropped points against Burnley and got bailed out by the official, as they did at the game at Turf Moor earlier in the season. Mm-hmm. So again, Arsenal is dropping points. Last season, when they stayed in the title race for a while, we said, this year they're not dropping points against the teams toward the bottom of the table, so they're going to stay in the title race. This year they're doing that, and I have to point out, there is constantly this focus, and NBC does it. NBC is taking it to a new level. Chelsea, Arsenal, title decider, or potential title decider. Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool versus Spurs, possible title decider. The title, almost every season I've followed the Premier League, which is now about 20 years, has been decided by whether you drop points to teams in the bottom half of the table. That is what decides the title.
Right.
So, for example, Jose Mourinho's first year back at Chelsea in 2013-2014 season, they took 12 points off of Liverpool and Manchester City. But those two teams finished first and second, or second and first, respectively, and Chelsea finished third because they dropped points to the teams near the bottom of the table. Now, this season, Chelsea lost at Stamford. Chelsea got 1 point against Liverpool, 2 matches. They did get 3 points against Arsenal, but they dropped the other 3 points. But they're not dropping points to teams below. They dropped 2 points to Swansea early in the season, and I think those are the only 2 points. Obviously, they lost to Spurs, another top team. I think those are the only 2 points they've dropped to a team outside the top 5 this entire season. That is why they're going to win the title. So this match was interesting to watch, and Wenger's unwillingness or inability to change the system, considering he had Cazorla, Ramsey, El Neni, and Xhaka all out for various reasons, that he decided to just throw Oxlade-Chamberlain into the role that one of those 4 guys would fill rather than change the shape of the team, and it didn't work, clearly. It was fascinating from that perspective, but as a title decider, no, it just kind of puts the cherry on the cake. If Chelsea is not going to drop points to lesser teams, this is what happened with Juventus in Italy too when Conte was there. They would lose games to Roma, and they would lose games to Napoli, and they would lose or drop points to Napoli and drop points to Roma and drop points to the Milan sides and Fiorentina. The year Fiorentina was really strong. But they wouldn't drop points to teams at the bottom half of the table. And it's the same thing that's happening here. Right. He has a mastery of that, keeping his team focused, keeping his team sharp. And before we depart this subject, I know that it's become fashionable analysis on NBC to say, well, they're not in Champions League. Arlo White said it again a couple times during the course of this match. That is correct, and he may be right to point that out. But this week, Courtois kind of refuted that, saying, look, we're less sharp. There's a sharpness issue of only playing once a week versus teams that play twice a week. We have to be especially good and train especially hard because the teams we're coming up against are playing midweek games and we're not. So that's a counter argument. Whether that's valid or not, I don't know, but that is it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's something that I don't think we hear that often in terms of that kind of viewpoint. And actually, I agree with Courtois there. For me, I mean, this one was really kind of the match that's really kind of showed that this, to me at least, that the Premier League season is over. I mean, 9 points ahead. I mean, Chelsea are just like rolling with it. I don't see anyone stopping them. I mean, the only one that can stop Chelsea is themselves, and the way that they're playing, how organized they are. They look unstoppable at this point. So if there was any hope that of a tight title race, this was it. And Arsenal, I mean, as Lee Dixon said many times in this match, it was men against boys. What I did like, Kartik, was actually the having Lee Dixon there and Graham Lasso. Lee Dixon more so, but Lee Dixon definitely, I mean, former Arsenal player, wasn't extremely hard on Arsenal, but definitely was pointing out in terms of just, I mean, how disappointing they were. Not kind of a Piers Morgan type of rant, but definitely kind of saying that, you know, Arsenal are just not good enough in terms of the mentality, and they didn't seem the commitment in terms of trying to win the ball, just playing very flat, as if they had really very little desire in this game. And I think it was really good to have him there, not as somebody who's going to just kind of give you kind of the you mean that everything is wonderful, everything is beautiful kind of viewpoint, but more kind of realistic. Okay, here's what's happening, on what I see on the pitch, and here's how disappointed I am with Arsenal's performance. The other thing, Kartik, too, I think in terms of this match that was good was well, actually, I'll come back to that a little bit later. But anything else in terms of this match, Kartik? In terms of anything else you saw or thought?
During the match, no. I mean, I in order to kind of handle the analysis of Wenger, I went back and watched the Premier League download, which I don't think we discussed on this show, that was on Boxing Day, and there was this roundtable of Piers Morgan and Amy Lawrence, Ian Wright, Martin Keown, and I can't remember one other former Arsenal player. But there was a poignant moment when I rewatched it when Piers Morgan is railing on Wenger. Now, and I will say Piers Morgan gave Wenger a lot of praise when they talked about 96 to 2004, right, or 2005. But then the second part of this Premier League download, he was very very nasty. Martin Keown says, you don't get to decide. Got very angry and said, you don't decide when he goes. He decides when he goes. He's earned that. And Wenger said, then how much longer? Not Wenger, sorry. Piers Morgan said, how much longer? I mean, we're in this perpetual holding pattern. Ian Wright jumped in and said he gets 3 more years.
Wow.
So that's the former players are all still, the ones even in the media are still kind of behind Wenger, it seems. Lee Dixon, on the other hand, he hasn't come out and said it, but he seems very critical. Mm-hmm. He's not Stuart Robson, right? I mean, Robson, by the way, I mean, Stuart Robson made the prediction that Arsenal would get points in this game on ESPN FC last week because he said, well, whenever Wenger's back is to the wall and it's time to go, he gets a result. Well, this time he didn't. So Robbo hasn't been back on ESPN FC. I didn't watch last night's show yet, but Monday and Tuesday he hadn't been back on. So I'm curious to hear his thoughts now.
Yeah.
But the point being that I think Dixon is elevated his commentary to a different stage. Now, he's not quite at the stage of, we like to talk about Craig Burley a lot on the show because I love his analysis. He's not yet at the stage where Burley was when Burley left England and came here to the States to start his career with ESPN in the States. It was done partly because he had been shunned by so many of his former Chelsea teammates who had gone into coaching, who had been kind of yes men and conformists. You know, I could even list them for you. I mean, the entire team that Burley played with essentially went into coaching, the Dennis Wises and the Zolas and the Gus Poyets and on and on and on, Ruud Gullit, Vialli, the team that he was with, Glenn Hoddle, right? These are the guys he played with. So he would never pull punches about guys he had actually played with. Dixon might be getting close to crossing a line with the Arsenal community. Now, I'm not sure necessarily that the people in the Arsenal community see all his commentary because it's on U.S. television. But that's going to be something interesting to watch because I thought Dixon was getting increasingly close during that telecast. And tell me if you disagree with this, to saying, okay, time is up. And he's never done that before. I think he was getting there by the time we got to the 80th minute.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's a fine line because in many ways you want to kind of give analysis, but you don't want to be kind of an analyst, so to speak. So kind of a studio analyst. Even if Lee was in the studio and Rebecca said to him, okay, is Wenger's time up? And Lee would say, I would think Lee would probably say at this point, yes. But as kind of a co-commentator, it's a different type of role. So you're providing match analysis and pointing out observations or things that go well or not so well to kind of paint a picture for the TV viewer. So it's a different type of analysis. And I think if Arlo had asked that question, that probably would have overstepped the line. But at the same time...
Yeah, I don't think he should ask the question. I don't think he should put Dixon in that position.
Exactly. Because then that kind of taints his co-commentary for the rest of the season, even if he ever did an Arsenal game again, too, where people are like, he's biased. So, but no, I agree with you, Kartik. It was interesting in this match, too, that I just remembered what I was going to say before, too, is that kind of Lee Dixon kind of name-dropping, he was getting texts from Vinnie Jones and David Seaman during the match, and some pointed analysis or pointed criticism from those guys, and he was kind of sharing that as far as, again, the men versus boys argument. So even though he wasn't coming out kind of straightforward and blatantly saying, like, yeah, Wenger has to go, if you read between the lines, I think for me, I agree with you, Kartik. It seemed to be that he's kind of leaning on that side of the camp. But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too for this match. I mean, it was a game that Chelsea was in command, and it's pretty much what Arsenal didn't do in this game, which is more the talking point in terms of just their performance, which was pretty weak except for the beginning of the game. So some of the other games I saw this past weekend, Kartik, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I saw midweek, I saw the Barcelona against Atleti Copa del Rey match, the second leg. And this was from Camp Nou, commentary by Phil Shane and Ray Hudson. And it was an enthralling second leg. It was a really, really good game. It was Atleti with a better performance in the first half. But it was a great matchup between both sides. It was a really kind of even match. In the second half, and we've seen this now in the last few weeks at least, and this happens every year really, kind of some bad refereeing, especially in La Liga, but it happens in the Premier League too. But Atleti had a goal that was ruled offside. It should have counted. Then he got a penalty, and Kevin Gamero blasted it over the top. So Atleti should have scored that. It should have taken that and scored then. But then Gamero scored again. Scored to tie the second leg 1-1. And that's how it ended. It ended 1-1, and with Barcelona getting the 3-2 aggregate victory. And then they go through now to play in the final against Alaves. But really, really good match, and wasn't a lot going on midweek in terms of football from around the world, but that one was one I enjoyed. And Kartik, how about you? Any other games or any other matches?
Well, my weekend was geared around Dortmund versus Leipzig because there's so much in it, right? Not only was it a top of the table clash in Germany, but it's this. There was a lot of talk that there were going to be a number of BVB fans that didn't show, and in protest of Leipzig and the corporate structure. And look, we've talked about this. I mean, I've talked about it on Twitter ad nauseum through the years, the whole Leipzig thing. And I remain very conflicted about Red Bull Leipzig, or Red Bull Rasenballsport Leipzig, as they're officially known, but RB Leipzig. It was a bit over the top, I think, the protests from the Dortmund fans. I mean, there was a self-righteous nature to this idea of community and fan ownership that I didn't quite get until you and I went to Germany a year and a half ago. And I came in, and you can attest to this, Chris, with this thing, well, I don't want to even see Leverkusen. They're a corporate club. They're not a people's club. Let's go to Schalke. Let's go to Dortmund. This is where this is community. This is football. Mm-hmm. And this is what they should be doing around the world. That was my impression, that the German clubs, and this is a lot of reading David Kahn and people like that who think that the entire football structure should be modeled on what German community clubs do. And Dortmund being the biggest of them, right? Dortmund has this massive following. They're have the second biggest following in the country and probably the most vocal fans, them and Schalke. What I found on the trip was that Leverkusen was a lot more of a people's club and kind of a on the surface thing than I had thought. And Schalke was a lot more corporate than I had thought. So extrapolating that to this, there should not be. It's difficult in the current scheme where everything is dictated by money for a club from an economically impoverished area like Leipzig to be successful without this sort of backing, right? And I mean, Leipzig is such a new club that they don't even have their logo on the Soccer Way app on the iOS, right? Because they're newer than most MLS clubs, and some fans don't realize this club was actually founded in 2009. But the game became all about the protests, about the signage in the stadium. It is the largest stadium in Germany. Munich has more fans overall, but Dortmund has a more intense following. So it's the most intense fans. It's like your Liverpool, if you want an English comparison. And it kind of drowned out the match, a match that was pretty good, but ended in controversy. I think it was the right call, the offside call that disallowed the Leipzig goal in stoppage time. But it was ever so close. And Dortmund wins 1-0, which brings them into third. Now Leipzig fall 4 points behind Bayern. Bayern-Schalke was an interesting game. I watched that as well. And
Kartik,
yeah.
Before we go on, so the Dortmund-Leipzig game, I missed it. I didn't see it. And how much analysis or discussion was there by the Fox crew in terms of kind of the topics that you've just talked about in terms of kind of
not as much as there should have been, but it was there because it was too noticeable to not talk about it. But the analysis was very basic, which was basically, well, hey, this is the way it is in Germany. There's a great passion for supporter-driven clubs and community-based clubs, and Eric Ronaldo didn't want to offer commentary on the specifics of Red Bull Leipzig, which is smart, but he talked about how, this is kind of the this is a focal point. This is a touch point. And when I was playing in Germany, there was resistance to Wolfsburg. There was always comments about Leverkusen. These clubs don't belong.
Right.
And Wolfsburg very much did this in the 90s and it was a period when they signed a lot of Americans. Claudio Reyna played for them, Brian McBride played for them, and Chad Deering played for them, among others. I think maybe Jovan Karofsky might have played for them too. But there were a bunch of guys that played for them that were Americans, but they popped up and did very well in the league for a couple of years out of nowhere at a time when Volkswagen was doing particularly well in their business. So there's always been this kind of talk, but RB Leipzig is to a whole nother level, and we could do a whole pod on this.
Right.
So we'll move on.
I think the difference, though, so Bayer Leverkusen, who's owned by Bayer or Bayer, the aspirin company, and then Wolfsburg, which is owned by, these have a lot of fan supports, but also owned by Volkswagen. To me, the difference with those two versus RB Leipzig is that they began as workers' teams.
Yeah.
Versus Leipzig, which is kind of, in terms of more of a corporate kind of commercialized structure that someone's just trying to, buy a team and take them all the way, which they're doing really, really well. So the final result in this match, was it a draw? They have,
by the way, Leipzig has, I think, something like 18 members. That's it. That's they're all Red Bull employees. So they're not. They're like an American sports franchise, or really like half the teams in England now, which are kind of owned by these oligarchies. But it's just to conclude for our listeners, it is a very foreign concept in Germany to have a club like that. It may be natural in the U.S. or England now, but it's very foreign in Germany. Continue.
And Kartik, the final result in this game, was it a draw or is it a win?
No, it was 1-0 Dortmund. And
okay.
Again, it was because of that late controversial offside call. I think the Leipzig attacker had maybe led with his arm a little bit, and his hand was offside, I guess would be how to describe it. It was that close, but the right call. Although you're always told, when in doubt, the official should side with the attacker, which is something that keeps getting peppered. I know we're going to get to this in a minute, but keeps getting peppered on Peter Walton every time he comes on the ESPN FC studio. He comes on once a week, and Burley and Nickel and Moreno are always Hislop when he's on are basically always saying, hey, you say that in a tie the advantage goes to the runner, right? That's always been the thought process. Why is this offside? But I think he was slightly off. I think it was the right call.
Do you want to go there as far as like the ESPN FC?
Yeah. So I know you watched this game. Burley was just adamant that there is no possible counter argument to Raheem Sterling being fouled by Fabianski and it being a penalty. He thought that it's
Swansea
just
Man City game.
Yeah,
right?
And the Swansea Manchester City game. It's clear as the night of day. He said the same thing about the Sterling foul, which I think we all agree on. Even Kyle Walker agrees. He took him down against Tottenham a few weeks earlier, and that was should have been not only a penalty but a sending off. But this was a little grayer. Now, it turned out Nickel and Moreno agreed with Burley, but Burley was adamant when Walton said, no, it's not a foul, and it's a dive. He's embellishing the contact. Burley was adamant. He said, wait a second. So Fabianski comes in his line. He's running. He's made a 30-yard run or whatever at full speed. How is he supposed to get out of the way? Mm-hmm. And it became – now, unfortunately, the idea was to bring Walton on to discuss all of these controversial calls. I'm sure they would have shown the Leipzig one. They never got to it because Burley was just so adamant about this call, call which was ruled by Mike Dean a dive by Sterling, which he believes was a penalty, that they never got past that one issue. But that was interesting television also because they had talked about it similarly in the NBC studio, and I can't remember if it was the same consensus that it was a penalty, but they certainly Martino must have worn as adamant as Burley was.
Right.
And for me, I'm not sure it was very close, but there just seems to be a consistent pattern with Raheem Sterling not getting calls, going back to the League Cup semifinals last season against Everton and then a couple of other games, which may have cost Manuel Pellegrini his job, or maybe they were going to bring Guardiola in anyway. But this seems to be a consistent pattern where Sterling has developed a reputation. And I don't want to get too deep into this today and get Liverpool fans coming after me, but I think so much of it has been a media narrative since he left Liverpool. And I'm trying to ascertain what it is. Our former colleague, Lawrence McKenna, even though he's a Liverpool fan, is quite a big Sterling fan, thinks that there's a hint of racism in it, perhaps. But it just seems to be a consistent pattern where there's been a media campaign against him, and now the officials all have in their mind that he's a diver on the level of a Jamie Vardy. Jamie Vardy, who doesn't get calls anyway, also gets the same kind of treatment, but for probably more justified reasons, or Arjen Robben, that kind of level diver, when I don't think Sterling is at that level.
I think part of it, though, too, with Raheem Sterling is just his speed and just that burst of pace. So
yeah, it's tough to officiate when a guy's that fast.
Exactly. And for me, in this particular match, no way should he have gotten a yellow card. I didn't think it was a dive. I thought it was more terms of kind of he was reacting to Fabianski coming out really fast and kind of just basically jumped to avoid contact, because if he'd stayed on his feet, he would have got smushed, for lack of a bit better word. But so whether or not that's a penalty or not, I would have to look at the referees and say, okay, well, they obviously know more about the rules of the game than I do. I thought it would have been harsh, but I would have not been surprised if a penalty had been awarded. And especially with penalties too, it doesn't have to be, or fouls, it doesn't have to be contact for there to be a foul ruled. But yeah, I thought Sterling getting the yellow card was ridiculous.
This kind of, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, brings us to a whole nother topic, and I'm sure we'll get more into this in another show. But this week, Howard Webb was hired by Major League Soccer and PRO, which is Peter Walton, to really kick off a video referee program, which Webb will head up. Mm-hmm. That kind of call would be reviewed over and over again. Now, does that just completely destroy a game? Think about it. I mean, I think it's interesting to be talking about this week, because MLS, I wasn't sure how serious MLS was about it, but the hiring of Howard Webb indicates that they're very serious about it.
Yeah.
Very, very serious about it. They hired one of the best referees in the world, now retired, but one of the biggest names to head this up. Will that fundamentally change the game?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit concerned it might.
It's so subjective, though. And that's the thing, even when we were watching games and whatever incident happens, and we as TV viewers watch it, and we see it in real time, and we go, penalty. And then we see a replay from one particular angle, go, oh, wait a second, maybe there wasn't contact. And then we see a different angle from that same incident, and we go, oh, no. Yeah, in slow-mo, we can see exactly that was intentional and that should have been a penalty, or whatever the case may be. But it's very subjective. It's very, very difficult sometimes to, even in slow-mo, to go, okay, did that person, yes, there was contact, but did that person dive? I mean, it's going to make it a lot harder in these games.
And the thing I've learned about referees through the years, at least the very prominent public ones, like the Webbs, like the Graham Poles, and like the Keith Hackett's, is that they don't necessarily, they're forced when they officiate to interpret rules, but they don't necessarily agree with all the rules. So I don't know if video refereeing brings in the subjective side of that. I'll just give you this one example. There was obviously the controversial Luis Suarez handball in the Ghana Uruguay World Cup quarterfinal in 2010. Mm-hmm. Graham Poll went out and wrote in the paper the next day. He said, look, unfortunately, the rules don't make sense. If a guy does that on the goal line, it should be a goal. I've advocated that for years. I still think FIFA needs to change that rule. And to me, that was shocking coming from a referee.
Yep.
Saying, hey, if it were up to him and he were making the rules, that would just be an automatic goal because a guy deliberately sticks his hand out. He said there's no potential remedy for the situation because if you're a player and it's the 120th minute and he was right, you take that chance and hope the guy misses the penalty, which Guion did. So Pohl said this is a rule change you need to make. And I've read Keith Hackett say there are rules changes you need to make. I've read Howard Webb say that. Now Howard Webb is going to be doing the video side of the game in the United States. Does he begin to bring some of those subjective thoughts into having the overall power to maybe change things? That's a good question too, and I don't know. I think on the whole, video is probably a good thing, but there's just always these questions I have about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. I think it's a good thing, but it needs to be, I think the biggest thing is there needs to be consistency. So if you have a video assistant referees, which the Bundesliga is going to be doing too, I'm guessing the Premier League will probably be doing it pretty quickly soon too, especially if MLS is going ahead and going to start using that. I think in the All-Star game is kind of probably the first time we'll see it, at least on TV. But there needs to be consistency. So there's no good having video assistant referees if there's inconsistent rulings made, because then, having technology, does that really help in that regard? So I think when it happens, there needs to be a clear, precise kind of maybe some rule changes to accommodate, to make sure that it is as equal and as fair and consistent as it should be and can be. Because otherwise it's just going to be more controversy in terms of why did this one video assistant referee award it this way in this particular match, and then in the next game a different person awarded it differently. It's going to be a hornet's nest. So Kartik, unless you have anything else on what we've been watching, you ready to move on?
I sure am.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's move on to the next segment, which is our TV streaming news. Big news this week, and we just announced it on Wednesday, and that is that fuboTV in the US has launched their new product. So we first talked about this, I think back in December, but what they've done is they've launched two new products. So the first one is called Fubo Premiere, or Fubo Premiere, depending on how you pronounce it, and that has almost everything. It has NBCSN, it has FS1, FS2, it has Fox Soccer Plus, which is a big one, and also it has a ton of other channels from Fox, NBC, the over-the-air networks, as well as CNBC, USA, FX, I think FX Movies. So a ton of channels, most of them sports channels, but also a lot of entertainment, news channels, etc. The pricing on this is $34.99 a month, and the regular price is, I think, $45 a month. So this one is kind of your cord-cutting solution. So if you've been contemplating cutting the cord with your cable or satellite company, this is the one to consider in terms of what they're offering and the price point that they're doing it at. All you would need then is just an internet connection. The only caveat at this point is that NBC Sports app and the Premier League Extra Time, which is very similar in both what they do, but those matches are not on Fubo Premiere at this time, but they do plan on adding those very shortly. So as soon as we hear that news, once they add those, we'll be sure to let you know. So that's the first product. They also have another product called Fubo Latino, and this is a very Spanish language heavy focus. So this is your Univision Deportes, Telemundo, Fox Deportes, NBC Universo, and Galavision, and a bunch of other Spanish language, mostly sports channels, some entertainment channels too. Univision, of course, too, and Unimas. So that one is $14.99 a month, and that one is definitely something that, if you're into Spanish language, you want to watch Spanish language football or commentary, that's the one for you. They also have a Fubo Portuguese, which is the Portuguese coverage of the Premier Liga, and that one is $19.99 a month, and that has all the Portuguese games as well as some Portuguese shows also, and programs and networks also too. So there you go. There's the Fubo news. It's available on a 24-hour free trial, and I'm going to be testing it this weekend and see how it is. So I'm going to be watching my FS1 and NBCSN and all those games and more on Fubo. Hopefully it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it. So Kartik, what other news is out there in the TV streaming news space?
Yeah, and by the way, I think we all got that Fubo email yesterday and was very tempted until I realized I get all those channels on my cable system and have to talk about it with my wife, the idea of cord cutting and just bulking up. But it was just, I saw that $34.99 for all those channels. My goodness, you can't get a better deal than that. So I actually need to scrutinize my cable bill and see what I'm paying for. But back to something we talked about earlier, the trio of Arlo White, Lee Dixon, and Graham Lasso. will be in a three-man booth again this week for the big Liverpool Spurs game on NBC. And seemingly the three-man booth has really worked. The dynamic between Dixon and Lasso in particular has become very seamless. They play off each other very well. And it's useful to have both those perspectives, which are kind of different perspectives. But I think what we've seen is Lasso get elevated. Dixon is one of the best co-commentators around in the UK or in the US or on the global feed. And Lasso has been elevated to really quite a high level working with Dixon, I think. And again, it's unfortunate that Graham Lasso couldn't get a job commentating on football in the UK, but I think there's been a great benefit to American viewers to have him. So, again, this will be the fourth match in 2 weeks where the trio work together instead of the kind of rotation we've seen of one or the other pairing with Arlo White. And then if there was another important game in a weekend, they would have Bauer paired with the other.
Yeah, the chemistry between these three is really good, and actually, I think there's a lot of people, a lot of listeners will probably agree with this. There's a lot of people that like Arlo White, and there's a lot of people that don't like Arlo White in terms of he talks too much. But I think having them as a trio, the chemistry is really good between them. And to me, like when NBC first announced their coverage, 3 years ago now.
4 years ago now.
4 years. Oh my gosh, time flies. Graham Lasso, I thought was better than Lee Dixon at that point in time, and that was just from listening to him on TalkSport and other programs. And then for a while, I thought they were equal. And for now, I think Lee Dixon's ahead of Lasso in terms of analysis and also sense of humor. I think that helps a lot too. But Lasso still does work. I mean, from time to time, I'll see him doing some stuff for BBC Sports in the UK. So he does more kind of sit-down kind of thought pieces or interview pieces. He does a different type of work than, say, Lee Dixon, which is more... Well, actually, Lee Dixon does too. Lee Dixon
Lasso actually comes on some... general kind of society discussion programs and political programs from time to time.
Yeah, he's a very intelligent guy, for sure. And I'm sure Lee Dixon and Arlo White are too. But Lasso takes it to a different level. Very sophisticated, very intelligent, definitely a thinking man's footballer. And I enjoy all three, listening to them, and the chemistry of them working together. I think it's great. But we shall see. So we'll see how they do on the Liverpool Spurs game, which should be a good one. But like you said, Kartik, I think the Premier League title race is over. Moving on, Kartik, in terms of other news, this is really not. This is news, I guess it is. But for those avid or very, observant viewers, beIN Sports have changed their look and feel, and they've changed the logo. So this is something that they've been doing for, I think, the last couple of weeks. They've kind of rolled it out. But if you pay attention to it, you'll see kind of the beIN Sports logo, the kind of the bug in the top right-hand corner is more sophisticated, a little bit more sleeker, thinner. But what the big change is, though, for me at least, is watching the matches themselves in terms of the graphics that come up at the beginning of the game with the team names and whenever someone scores a goal, as well as the score bug, the kind of the score line in the top left corner. They've enhanced and improved all of those, and actually the design of it looks a lot better. It looks really modern. NBCs, a lot of people complain it's too big, but NBCs, actually even NBCs have changed theirs little by little, small enhancements. But the beIN Sports one, if you haven't caught it yet, take a look this weekend. You'll see kind of a new and improved graphics on screen. And for those who watch as much soccer as we do and our listeners do, I think it's something that we'll definitely notice more than the average person on the streets who may not notice or care. Kartik, any other news? Yeah,
so Mike Tirico is going to replace Bob Costas as the host of the Olympic Games on NBC, beginning with the Winter Games in 2018. That's an interesting, very interesting change, actually, surprising in some ways. But Tirico didn't go to NBC to sit around, right? And he's had. I don't watch the NFL. I guess maybe he's had a role in their NFL coverage. But the only thing I've seen him on that's not Olympic related is the British Open. the Open Championship, which he hosted for years on ABC and ESPN. Has just kind of continued in that role with NBC, but I haven't seen him really contribute to other coverage. So that's an interesting side note. Now, unfortunately, they don't have any major soccer tournaments for him to host, because obviously World Cup 10, World Cup 14, Euro 16, Tirico was one of the primary hosts for ESPN, but perhaps he can be used and fill in the soccer role if NBC acquires more properties going forward. He would love to do another World Cup or two. Doesn't look like that's on the horizon for NBC, but who knows? And again, this might be a chance to remind our listeners that Fox does have the rights for 2026 also, and there is going to be bidding on 2026 in other countries, World Cup rights. But in the U.S., they were given some sort of concessional extension because of the Qatar situation, it being in the winter. So it'll be a while before NBC and ESPN have another crack at a World Cup.
Right. Yeah, and for those listeners who are from overseas, I mean, Bob Costas is kind of the granddaddy of sports coverage in the US. I mean, definitely kind of at the height there. So for Mike Tirico, with his, I mean, he's done a ton of other sports, but he's definitely done a lot of soccer coverage. For him to step into the shoes of Bob Costas for the 2018, that's a big deal. Okay, Kartik, let's move on to TV ratings, and feel free to interject as I go through here and kind of give listeners some updates on what's been happening. Something that we've been doing the last couple of weeks is kind of drawing a lot of comparisons between the Friday broadcasts of the Bundesliga compared to the Championship, and the last couple of weeks on the Bundesliga had some really poor ratings on the Fridays. One of them was it was the presidential inauguration, although that happened earlier in the day, but still a lot of people were distracted. And then I think last weekend, if I remember, last Friday, the match wasn't your Bayern Munich's kind of playing on a Friday, so those numbers were kind of not as good, not as strong as they usually would be normally. Well, not that strong, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so for last Friday, we had a championship game that was on beIN Sports, and that was Wigan against Sheffield Wednesday. And did that do better than the Bundesliga, which was on FS2, which was Hamburg against Leverkusen? So it came close. So Wigan against Sheffield Wednesday had 20,000 viewers, while Hamburg against Leverkusen had 26,000 on FS2. And we should note that FS2 is in more than twice as many homes as beIN Sports. You got 50 million on FS2 compared to 23 million on beIN Sports. So not too shabby for the championship to almost get as many viewers as a Bundesliga game on FS2. And of course, we've talked about FS2 in the past too. It's kind of the last bastion of soccer coverage. It's just one of those channels that, I mean, of those people who get it, not a lot of people watch it. Kartik, any other TV ratings from the weekend that stood out for you?
Yeah, so 445,000 people turned on at 7:30 a.m. It used to be 7:45 a.m. Eastern time to watch Chelsea Arsenal. That 15 minutes, I keep forgetting actually, and we'll turn on for the last bit of pregame and realize the game is kicking off. It happened again with this one. So 445,000 viewers tuned in to watch that. That's a little bit disappointing. Quite honestly, we've seen more viewers for early morning games in the past, including 7 years ago in 2010 when close to 600,000 viewers watched a Manchester United Chelsea game on ESPN2 that started at 7:45 a.m. So this was, all things considered, sort of a disappointing rating. However, more people continued to watch after the game the NBCSN pregame show, which you told me you had to mute because of the excellent adventure that you were trying to follow on Facebook.
Right.
340,000 then watched the USA-Jamaica game, which was on in prime time on FS1 the previous night at 338,000. I will admit I did not watch a minute of either U.S. game, the Serbia game or the Jamaica game. These January/early February friendlies, which are not on FIFA dates, don't really bother me very much. I've read all the analysis of the matches, so I know kind of who from people's opinions played well and who didn't. But when there's a lot of soccer on television, that was not a priority. Now, I will watch the national team games in March, but I'm among the people that would have created that ratings dip, because that is a very low number for a U.S. men's national team game, particularly in prime time.
Yeah, and especially.
I mean, even BN gets higher numbers when they're showing these random U.S. games that they at Central American countries that they picked up piecemeal the rights to. So that was a very low rating.
Yeah, which everyone always complains whenever BN Sports has the USA games, because it's like, nobody gets BN Sports, but then people find a way to watch it still. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, they're still pretty enlightening though that the Premier League live show, kind of basically the pre-match analysis or post-match Chelsea Arsenal, but pre-match the 10 o'clock games will get more viewers on a Saturday morning, between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. Than the USA Jamaica game would on a Friday night in prime time on FS1, even though the USA Jamaica game was far less relevant. But that at the same time too, and we alluded to this last week, that's the challenge for the Bundesliga. The Bundesliga games kick off at 9:30 on a Saturday morning. But the challenge is at the same time there's pre-match analysis, and NBC does such a good job. Not perfect by any means, but definitely a good job of that pre-match, post-match analysis. That you want to keep on watching and see what's happening there. So big challenges for the Bundesliga, but also for the USA. I missed that game too, Kartik. I think Friday night I was out, but I was hoping to watch it to see how Landon Donovan did in kind of that as part of the trio for the commentary. But I'm with you too in terms of there's so much coverage to choose from that. I'm being more selective and kind of choosing the games that really interest me. Yeah, and ESPN FC had a good lead into the game on ESPN FC program with Santiago Salazar hosting and Herc Gomez coming in for that segment. And again, I don't know. I mean, Gomez was okay on Fox, but I'm finding more value for him already in his 2 weeks on ESPN. Maybe I talk about this topic ad nauseum, but I think so much of how we judge commentators ends up being based on the atmosphere they're in and where they're placed. And I just kind of wish Landon Donovan had gone to ESPN, as had been rumored several months ago, because I think he really would have excelled in that environment. He still might, though. So I don't think he signed a contract yet with FS1. It might have been just Fox Sports. Might have been just kind of a one-game deal, and that's still probably on the cards. I wouldn't be surprised if ESPN and Fox Sports are basically kind of negotiating and just trying to convince Donovan to come to their side. So we shall see what happens there. I think FS1, Fox Sports has the advantage in terms of the amount of coverage that they have and the amount of rights that they have, which is far greater than ESPN. So, but at the end of the day, for Landon, it might come down to the money, and let's see who offers the most enticing package. Moving on to the next segment, Kartik, listener mailbag. We've got a couple of messages that came through Twitter. The first one is from Dave Brunk, who's one of our listeners, and he's got two questions, Kartik. The first one I'll ask to you. He says, I'm interested in your opinion if MLS is concerned about Houston and Dallas impacted by a potential San Antonio team. Yes, that keeps being the pushback argument, one of the two pushback arguments I get against putting a team in San Antonio, the other being that it's too small a general television market, 32nd in the country. However, as I pointed out last week, it's the 7th largest Hispanic TV market, which is something that keeps being forgotten about by those who analyze it. And I think that's very important to Major League Soccer. That's why they have yet to give up on the Miami-Fort Lauderdale market, which is third on that Hispanic rating. I do think that is a concern. I keep hearing you cannot have 3 teams in Texas, but I don't think that's a hard and fast rule. And San Antonio, as I point out, is one of only a handful of markets in the country, and it's a really small list. Maybe it's the only one, actually, that has consistently supported a lower division team with at least 7,000 fans a game, even when the team isn't playing well, even when the team is not successful on the field. It might be a list of one city, and then they have the ownership, and they have the politicians behind them, and they have the stadium. I think it's
I think it would be very difficult to keep San Antonio out. But that is Dave asked a very serious question, because that is the pushback, and you see it in just about every article about expansion.
And sometimes competition is good. Sometimes it can actually help.
And for those who don't know the geography of Texas, I should point this out. Texas is this huge state, right? It's bigger than most countries. However, the actual distance between San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, and Austin, the 4 primary cities in the state, is not very far. So San Antonio is 3 hours from Houston. It's 3.5 hours from Dallas. It's not very far.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kartik, and Dave Brunk also has another question. He says, also, I'm curious which football podcasts you all enjoy. I regularly listen to Will Soccer Talk, Football Weekly from The Guardian, BBC 5 Live's Football Daily, and The Football Show on and off the ball. Any others you would recommend?
That pretty much covers it, although I think what's happened to me is since, and this goes back again to so much was pivotal that happened in the summer of 2013. NBC got the Premier League rights, and ESPN decided to launch the ESPN FC show. I think for me, because I watch ESPN FC probably as religiously as anyone, my podcast listenership has dropped off on football podcasts. But 5 Live, I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm not listening to it as much as I used to, and I used to listen to it regularly. The Guardian Football Weekly, I would listen to regularly. I still listen to it occasionally. So that's another good one. And there are a smattering of other podcasts out there about European football. And there seems to be a cottage industry developing of more American kind of local flavored podcasts, maybe geared towards specific teams or specific leagues.
And for me, Kartik, I just pulled up my iTunes playlist to see kind of which podcasts I have on there that haven't already been mentioned. The 2 that jump out are the Spurs Show, and I'm no Spurs supporter by any means.
Yeah, that's actually a very good one. Yeah,
but I enjoy that. It's actually Paolo Hewitt, who's on who's a journalist. He's often got some interesting takes. I just like personally listening to Spurs supporters, because you get so much of the opposites. You get the extreme negatives, and you get the positives in terms of everything that Pochettino's doing. I just think the podcast it's pretty simple, nothing special, but I enjoy listening to it, and it's always interesting takes on that one. And then the second thing is the Football Attic. So this is kind of one of my ones I enjoy. And the Football Attic, usually it's maybe like once every couple of weeks or once every few weeks, I put out a podcast. It usually focuses on football kits, and sometimes we'll talk about different topics, kind of nostalgia, whether it's like Subbuteo or something else. But it's run by Chris Oakley from I forgot the name of the podcast. The blog.
Some People on the Pitch was what
yes,
he did
yes.
years and years ago.
Yes. So he's now living in New Zealand, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the podcast. So if you're into nostalgia and kind of back in 70s, 80s English soccer, or just some interesting takes on football kit designs and kind of what's happening from everything from Umbro to Puma to Nike to Under Armour, etc. That's definitely a great podcast to listen to. I highly recommend it. Okay, Kartik, so let's move on. One more question, actually, from the listener mailbag. This is from Robert Hay Jr., and this is more of a statement. Okay, he says, 4-hour Super Bowl and not one ad for a Fox soccer property, multiple for Daytona 500, and silly-looking APB show. Is APB bowling?
I don't know. American Professional Bowling, I guess, maybe.
Maybe. Rob Stone would know. I know. But so Kartik, what's your take? What's your take on this?
Had that. Yeah.
What's your take on Robert's observation?
Yeah, I think it's very serious. I mean, NBC had the Super Bowl. They were promoting the Premier League very actively, and Fox, they can't be bothered. It's disappointing because I think they have a month now until MLS season kicks off, and they could have promoted Major League Soccer returning to Fox on the next day on FS1. They could have done that. They could have promoted their Champions League is restarting in 10 days. They didn't do that. Look, ESPN there's a lot of criticism of ESPN by MLS fans saying, well, they promote other soccer properties more. And this was always the critique, right, when they had the Premier League, before the Premier League rights went to NBC, that ESPN promoted the Premier League more than they promote MLS. Well, yeah, there is more of a mainstream acceptance on SportsCenter if you're promoting an Arsenal versus Chelsea game versus, Kansas City versus whoever, Columbus. I will admit there was some snobbishness about that on ESPN. But they are promoting MLS. They have the Orlando City-New York game on March 5th, the kickoff, the first game of the season. They're already promoting that game on various ESPN programs. So for Fox not to do it during the Super Bowl was pretty egregious in my from where I sit. And NBC promotes soccer during all their programs. I mean, I happened to be in a restaurant that they were showing an NHL game a couple weeks ago, and there was a promotion for the Premier League. So it's a matter of culture and attitude at the networks, and I think we learned a lot, or I shouldn't say learned a lot, it confirmed a lot of our fears and suspicions about Fox.
In Fox's defense, I will say that one of our listeners or readers on Twitter did say that there was a World Cup trophy shown pre-game. I didn't see it, so I don't know if it was just kind of like in the background they had the World Cup trophy. So that there's that. I will also say that according to our listeners and readers, that Fox supporters in their Super Bowl coverage had a few different soccer ads. And I think I'll end it there for in Fox's defense. But it is one of those things, though, too, that even like yesterday, I think it was the Leicester Derby game, the FA Cup replay, which the first half was horrible, the second half was great. But within that show, halftime, they were doing kind of like, hey, here's what's coming up on Major League Soccer, and here's what's coming up on the preview for the Bundesliga, and also post-match, kind of a lot of, again, so within the soccer broadcasts on Fox Soccer, Fox Sports, FS1, FS2, they're doing a lot of kind of trying to build the audience for MLS and for the Bundesliga. But same old complaint that we've always had is that not a lot of people are watching. I mean, if you're a soccer fan, you're probably going to be watching those games for the most part anyway, and you're going to know about it. But for outside of that community, for those people that are casual fans or maybe don't know a lot about soccer or want to learn about it, I mean, the Super Bowl would be the show English language to at least have maybe 15 seconds. At the same time, though, too, I mean, that the value of those 15 seconds is enormous. I mean, we know from the overtime, just the Super Bowl going into overtime, that I think Fox Sports generated $20 million in extra revenue. So it's from Fox's point of view, it's a dollar sign. But then again, at the same time, I don't want to go on forever about this. But at the same time, was it NBC Sports on Monday Night Football? Bob Costas announced when the NBC had gotten the deal to get the Premier League. It was like, I think Monday Night Football, they spent a few minutes talking about how NBC had got the Premier League rights, and that was a big deal. So I don't know. I see both sides. I mean, it would have been nice for Fox.
I think what's happened, to be honest with you, is that because they have the rights to FIFA tournaments now, Fox, the rights to club games are secondary, and there's the rah-rah USA aspect of their MLS coverage, which they will promote. Although there's heightened kind of sensitivity to that in this political climate, but I think the Bundesliga and Champions League now are largely throwaways for them, and perhaps the next go-around in the Champions League, ESPN can do a better job with the property than Fox.
Yeah, it does seem that way in terms of kind of club soccer rights. FA Cup 2 is kind of, it almost seems to be throwaway, where kind of Fox takes it for granted.
The FA Cup, in fairness, I think the tournament is becoming a throwaway for the teams involved. So I can't really fault Fox for that one. And there's a lot of criticism of which games Fox selects, but they don't have the liberty. The FA Cup, we've talked about this before, is still 10, 15 years behind in terms of what they do with television and video.
Right. Well, I will say just one more thing, Kartik, before we move on, is that the schedule's out for the FA Cup fifth round games. They're going to be on Fox. And every single game will be available either on TV or streaming. So I think it's 8 games left. So check out worldsoccertalk.com for that schedule. All right, Kartik, so let's move on to our featured topic of the week. And this one is some more interesting research from Gilt Edge Soccer Marketing. And they brought out an infographic that came out this past weekend, I believe. It's called Soccer on TV in 2016 from a U.S. perspective. So for us and for our listeners, this will be of interest. Maybe have you, Kartik, kind of lead off in terms of kind of sharing any of the stats or research from this graphic.
There's a lot of soccer on television. That's the first thing in the U.S., the first thing that's jumped out at me. And I have to be honest with you, Chris, when I looked at this, I thought, my gosh, maybe there's too much soccer on television. So total channels carrying matches. There are a couple really good takeaway stats from and Gilt Edge Soccer and John Guppy and the guys there are doing a fantastic job of accumulating data and really giving us some empirical data about the sport we love. But total channels carrying matches, 39. That is a lot. There are 9.8 matches per day on average on American television. You have 80 plus different leagues, tournaments that are on U.S. television. The team which is on the most is Barcelona with 78 total matches. Now I know the one of the employees of City Football Group, which owns Manchester City and also New York City FC, has inquired of Gilt Edge to try and get some more information as to where Manchester City ranks in that versus Barcelona. The slowest month. The most matches in a single day was 34. Can't imagine when that was. June, September, and November, there were games every day. Now, remember, June was Copa America and the Euros, and it was just crazy. And I will admit I was burnt out of soccer after that and didn't really reemerge until the start of the Bundesliga and Premier League and Serie A seasons 6 to 8 weeks later. The number of matches that are broadcast, 32% in Spanish, 34% in English, and 34% in both English and Spanish. So it's basically one-third, one-third, one-third. And so that means you can get 2/3 of the matches if you're an English speaker in English. And so that I thought was pretty telling. No surprise, the channel with the most broadcasts is beIN Sports. Be interesting to see who was second. It's probably FS1 or FS2, even though NBC has such... NBCSN has so many Premier League games, they don't have anything else. Here's another interesting stat. The slowest month as far as games was December, even though those of us who follow the Premier League closely tend to think of December as just the most ridiculous month on the calendar, but it's the only league playing at the time, or that in Scotland. And Scotland not really featured on American television, so at least not extensively. So that was interesting to me because I always think of December as being kind of the heart of the season, and it's not in most of the world.
And the biggest month, or the busiest month, is October with 399 games. So
yeah, well, that's because you have Champions League in full swing, and then you also have these midweek cup competitions, Copa del Rey is going on, the League Cup in England. It's
Europa League.
Yeah,
right.
October. Yeah, Europa League, right? October, there's a game every day in October. I'm surprised that it didn't reach. Well, I guess it did reach June. You're saying it was busier. So that is, and then you have these Friday games now in France and Germany and in the English Championship and sometimes in the Premier League, which also consume viewing, and it's become. I have to say, the Friday Bundesliga game has almost become such a standalone event that it kind of, I don't want to say it messes up the weekend, but there's a team that it psychologically always has a jump in terms of the table, because it seems like it's always Dortmund, Bayern, or Leipzig playing on those Friday games.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that Bayern Munich, I think to kick off the second half of the season after the winter break, it was Bayern in that first game, so kind of that gave them the advantage there of playing on that Friday. A couple of other stats that jump out in this research, Kartik, is that there were only 20 days in the whole of 2016 where there wasn't any soccer on TV. Wow. 20 days. And then also the other thing, though, too, is that the number of games in total. So there were 3,557 games shown in 2016 on TV. That's enormous. The other thing, though, Kartik, though, too, is that this research doesn't factor, I believe, and actually WorldSoccerTalk.com was part of the research that helped out Gilt Soccer Edge on this one, is that it doesn't include games that are available streaming only. So beIN Sports Connect is a great example of, they've got so much coverage of different leagues from around the world. Got Swiss League now, Swiss Super League is back in action, as well as Liga 1, Serie A, La Liga, etc. There's just so many games, Championship 2, that they can't have on beIN Sports and beIN Sports and Espanol, just because you can only show so many games there. That it would be interesting to see what this research looks like if you include streaming, legal streaming, as part of this too, because the numbers would just certainly increase across the board, I'm sure. Now, Kartik, you have to wonder, though, too, so a couple of years ago, I think it was Don Garber that said that there was he argued that there's too much soccer on television. And at the time, I think I wrote a piece, actually, on World Soccer Talk and just talked about it, just saying, this is just crazy. How could somebody complain about there being too much soccer on television? For the consumer, it's great, because you can choose from any league pretty much around the world and watch the best of soccer. But I think, definitely at this point, I think what he's complaining about, though, too, is from a league commissioner's point of view, is it's hard for MLS to be relevant when viewers at home, which is really kind of where the money comes from in terms of TV rights. If MLS really wants to grow in the future, TV rights is going to be a huge part of that. It's really difficult for MLS to be relevant when there's so much other soccer on TV. Not that just there's so much other soccer on TV, but I would argue that in many cases it's better quality. So how does MLS compete in a crowded marketplace like this, Kartik, on the TV rights side?
It's difficult. I don't know that they do. That's really the reality. This is I've gotten to the point where I'm not sure MLS can improve its television profile or its television ratings. I know that's not the view of everybody. We had this discussion a few weeks back on this show, but there is almost too much soccer. Look, I'm burnt out. I can't. There's so many midweek games that I don't watch now. Mm-hmm. So Barca Atleti, I knew what was going on, and normally if that's a game that's going on a weekend, although if it's going on a weekend, it's a league game, right? I'm jumping to it. But it was a Copa del Rey second leg. I don't really want to watch it. I'll find out what happens after I'm watching ESPN FC anyway. And they got all the analysis I needed. There's almost a certain degree of burnout that's coming with the current trajectory of how much soccer's on television.
I think a large part of it, though, is just choice. So for me, I get paid. My job is to watch soccer. So that's my full-time job. I watching soccer games. On average, probably 2 games a day, sometimes 3. But yes, I get burnt out too. But I'm trying to be more selective. So I'm kind of looking at the schedule for a whole week and kind of, okay, let me try this one. Let me see. Like Liga 1 was one match I watched this past weekend. It was Dijon against PSG. I thought, okay, let me tune this in and see what's happening. And it was a really boring game. Dijon was horrible. PSG was pretty lifeless. And after about 15 minutes or so, I was like, okay, let me just switch this off and let me try something else. And that might have been when I was watching the Porto against Sporting game. But I think at the end of the day, it's you and I, Kartik, come from, I think, a soccer culture where there was very little soccer on TV. So I think we're probably more inclined to try to watch as much as possible just because it's part of our DNA. But I think for our own good, but also for the listeners too, I think it's one of those things we just have to be more selective and pick and choose what we want to see. And other than the Middle East, I think in terms of quantity and quality, we have some of the best coverage from around the world. I think the Middle East has more coverage, which is hard to believe, but they do. But for the most part, we're probably number 2 in the world in terms of the amount and quality of coverage that we can watch. And at the end of the day, I would argue that it makes the American soccer fan a better educated, more well-rounded viewer of the game from a world soccer perspective than people in the UK and people in other countries that you would see as kind of people that were perceived as being soccer experts. We can watch practically anything from around the world, any time of the day, you name it, whenever we want to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it perhaps makes you less an expert on a single league and more an expert on kind of general concepts. Because, I mean, the thing that always stuns me in Britain, and you and I both travel there, is that how little people know about the rest of global football. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, They know Spain. Spanish league they've been watching for years, but beyond that, they don't know very much about German football even, or Italian football. Mm-hmm. It's pretty striking, or Portuguese football. They concepts, ideas, people are introduced to them when they come to the Premier League, and that's not the case here. We know a lot about people and trends and tactical trends and things like that before the British do in many cases.
Right, and a lot of it is access too. So we have access to more games than they do. They can't watch as many games because there's blackouts. I mean, they can't watch any soccer on Saturdays between their time between 3 and 5:15. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no matter what's happening around the world, they can't watch any of those games. So and on top of that too, they have less coverage overall, although it's improving. But yeah, it's a good place to be. I mean, definitely, if you live in the US, you should feel lucky and privileged that you can watch as much soccer as you want. Kartik, one question for you too is I'm just wondering, and you would know better than I would, but is there any other sports in the US across all lines of sports that's televised as much as soccer?
No. College football maybe, but it's a short season. College football is on constantly. Mm-hmm. And because different conferences negotiate different rights deals, and you've seen even BN now is showing Conference USA, there are also specialty channels like the SEC TV and Pac-12 television and the Longhorn Network. So I guess college football is on as much as soccer, but that's it. No other professional sport is on as much as soccer.
Right. Yeah, and even with college football, like you said too, it's a short season. So with soccer, I mean, with it being, only 20 days in the whole entire year where there's no soccer on TV, and I can guarantee you, I can bet you that on those 20 days there was soccer on. It was on streaming, on legal streaming sites that you could have watched. But and that's something that at some point for worldsoccertalk.com would be a good topic, is just the fragmentation of soccer in the US. If you take all the TV rights and all the viewing numbers for all the different sports and leagues, soccer leagues, and combine those together, what does that number equal? Because I would be convinced that number is actually a huge number. It's just that soccer is so fragmented, so many leagues, so many competitions, so many options, that the numbers seem smaller than what they are. And when we compare that to NFL games, where, for professional American football, there's no other game in town really. Other than some Canadian Football League or something like that. But really, the NFL has no competition from a football perspective, an American football perspective. All right, Kartik. So for those listeners who have questions, feedback, or opinions that you guys want to share, and you want us to read those out on air, we'd be happy to. You can contact us through email, which is web@worldsoccertalk.com. Through Twitter, you can reach us at WSoccerTalk. And then through Facebook, you can reach us through facebook.com/worldsoccertalk. And we would definitely love to hear from you in terms of any thoughts or analysis or opinions, questions you may have. And then, Kartik, where can listeners find you on the internet?
KKFLA737 on Twitter is the easiest way to find me. That kind of aggregates everything I'm doing elsewhere.
All right. And then people can find me through worldsoccertalk.com. And you can find all the contact information on that website if you want to reach out directly to me. So thank you for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, and be sure to send us your feedback or questions so we can read those out on air. And Kartik, over to you, sir.
Enjoy your football.